Hi, I'm Kor.
I'm Shabu.
And today we're going to be taking a look at some scenes from Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood and breaking down some of the ways the soundtrack and sound design is used to make the show so good.
First thing we're going to be looking at is the state alchemy test. That's the sickest thing. I'll talk about that after because I need more time, but that's my favorite part.
Prominence of the sound design here is very noticeable.
Really cool. The sound design in this scene in particular is really, really fascinating. God, the orchestration in this show is so freaking good.
I do like the subtle ways you can hear the volume of the piece being changed to match with the dialogue. I love that sound effect. So basically in that scene, we have him showing off a bit to King Bradley and seeing that he's not as strong as he is. But the way that they use sound effects from like right off the bat is probably the thing that I think stands out the most about that.
Yeah, I definitely think so the music is incredible, and I think that the orchestration is amazing. I think that especially towards the beginning, there's these really interesting stabs that kind of linger on top that have this really great rhythmic pulse that push things forward. But I do think that in this clip in particular, at first glance, it might not be what comes to people's minds, but I think that really the star of the show is the sound and the sound design. I think that that's right off the bat when Ed claps his hands together and starts doing alchemy. Something that's really fascinating is that clap is obviously there's the clap sound, and then there's also that kind of ringing bell sound, which is a very pure, in all ways, literally a very pure sound.
Yeah.
Which I think is really, really interesting and fascinating from a plot perspective. And they obviously wanted you to pay a lot of attention toward it because there's no music. And when I'm looking towards syncing music to something, I'm thinking of okay, what's a good spot to have the music come in where it's either has the most impact or is the least obtrusive. And I think that a great spot would be right when the clap happens, right? But instead they actually decide to wait until a little bit after that, just to make sure that the sound of the clap and the ring get their full effect, and the audience is really kind of clued into that.
The fact that the music comes in after the sound effect has already started is like a signifier that it's supposed to be noticeable. It's supposed to draw your attention. A lot of times, and we'll see even in here a little bit later in some of the other clips, they use a sound effect to cover up that transition in the music because it's an effective way to sort of blur the line so that you don't notice it too clearly. Another big thing that a lot of scores do is intentionally cut out or choose not to have music for the most important moments, because that absence of music, especially in shonen series like this that tend to be very heavy on the amount of music that is in the episode. There's just usually a lot of music playing in the background most of the time. So when there's not something there, then you can tell that it's really important.
Yeah, and I'd also like to, just something I was thinking about right now, I hadn't thought about this earlier, is that for the alchemy circle sound, I think it's really interesting. It's super high pitched, which is also really attention grabbing.
Well, that's what the waveforms mean when you see those little wiggly things. It's literally
little wiggles.
The sound is literally more agitated. I think one other fun thing with this is just how much sense of building that the piece itself has, because you have this chromatic movement in the lower end where it's going up these very small increments. There's just this strong sense of motion to it. I even think another part of it is there's these fast staccato notes at the beginning, these very short ones.
Yeah.
And it puts all the release of energy at the beginning of the phrase. It lets it all up just so it can get back to building as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
It wants to maintain that sense of it's always building no matter what. But you have to release a little bit so that you can keep doing that.
Yeah, it's that orchestration is so fascinating because it's quite simple, but it's really, really effective. It's similar in that regard. I'm not saying that the actual function of it is similar, but it's similar in that regard to something like John Williams, where the orchestration is fairly simple, but the actual outcome is quite powerful, very potent. And I wrote something kind of similar here, which was like due to very clever orchestration and melody writing, the piece doesn't need to go to all these other places, right? It doesn't have to go way into the realm of overly complex. It just like can build on itself and be incredibly cleanly written and satisfying.
I also want to mention the last thing in this scene. There's a bunch of other interesting sound effects, but especially the sound effect for as Bradley is leaving the scene. It's a more of a comedic beat after a scene that's like all been completely dramatic up to this point. It's played very serious. The second they pull, the rug out from under Ed, you get this. It's like strange. It's like rolly and like wobbly, but it doesn't sound
took my talking
quite
point,
like
you bastard.
Well, if it wasn't so damn interesting, I wouldn't have to bring it up. It's just it has such a sound that I feel like I haven't heard that much before, because a lot of, especially in anime, but in cartoons in general, there's a very, I'd say, well-defined language, especially when it comes to what you're using to accentuate things for the sake of comedy. There's just
especially
certain
shonen.
sounds. Yeah, there's just certain sounds you hear. And this one is definitely in the vein of the sounds that you hear, but it still sounds new. It sounds like fresh, not just like something pulled like out of a library randomly.
It definitely is. And then it kind of goes into that weird drone at the end.
Yeah.
And I think that like, dude, it's so sick because like with that one in particular, it's a non-diegetic sound, right? So it's something that's purely for the viewer's benefit, right? Mm-hmm. I think what's like so interesting is because if you played another sound effect and you had like obviously different visuals, the scene might come off very differently. Like if you had something a bit more intense or suspenseful, I think Bradley could be viewed a bit more in a sinister light. And so this very disarming sound effect and disarming visuals aids the plot very well.
Right.
And that bring up non-diegetic. So real quick, diegetic and non-diegetic is just like fancy words for exists in the world or doesn't exist in the world. So a diegetic sound would be like footsteps. Footsteps exist in the world, right?
I find that hard to believe.
There's no proof. No one's found proof of it yet. But the non-diegetic sounds are stuff that's purely for our benefit that the characters wouldn't be able to hear, right? An example of a really fascinating diegetic sound that I found particularly interesting is when Ed's polearm gets cut. We don't see the actual cut because the whole thing, it's kind of humorous. It's also kind of building up Bradley's character, whatever. But the polearm gets cut, and a little bit later it like pops off and it's like boop, and then it goes down and it falls. If you think about it, that wouldn't have that big old metallic sound that it has when it pops off, right? Because it's a wood polearm. Like maybe the rattling of it, but like that very much seems like something for the audience's benefit, but it's played off as a diegetic sound. What I like about it is it has a kind of an upswing and then it has a down. So it has a very nice curve of like up and then down. It follows the visual. So it goes up and then when it hits the ground, it goes down.
Right.
And I really like that sound effect because it adds a lot of impact and weight to that visual, kind of, I don't know if you'd call it a visual gag, but it's that kind of visual action almost requires that because it's so sudden that it simultaneously makes the impact more impactful.
Yeah.
While also kind of not making the viewer confused, right? And not like missing out on something. Yeah. So it's a very helpful little sound.
Having that more metallic sound, having that more like metallic sound definitely makes it more like biting and sharp as opposed to if they used like a more like properly like woody sounding effect, it wouldn't have quite that instant like attack to it in terms of how it sounds, which I think speaks to the importance of like with sound design. Like I find it such a fascinating profession because of how much kind of ingenuity you have to use, because it's not always like the sound that sounds right for a show is usually not the sound that something actually makes. Sometimes it's close,
it's
but
cool.
almost always it's not like one to one in terms of like the realism, especially when we're talking about the world of animation where everything is so heavily heightened and so, you know, distanced from like true reality. So having the thought process to be able to think like, oh, this particular sound effect might work here, even though it wouldn't actually make any sense, and it sells the scene, is like a very impressive thing.
Yeah, no, it's also from like a practicality usage standpoint, right? Because earlier in the scene we have Ed grabs his metal hand, and it makes a very similar kind of metallic crunching sound, and then we get that kind of sheath sound of the pole arm getting lopped off and then falling. And then we get another one that's also similar to the sheath sound, which is when Bradley rotates his sword and it like catches some of the light, which definitely wouldn't make a sound like that, but it's like added for that little bit of extra flair at the end, you know? I love that, dude. Like, it's so cool. It's such an interesting field. It's such a sick field to creativity, I think.
Awesome. So next up, we've got the oh so famous and so sad, the Nina Tucker reveal from episode 4.
できたよ。完成品だ。人語を理解する君
Dude,
ら。
I forget how creepy this scene is.
They really play it to the max.
いいかい。この人はエドワード。エドワード。
Oh god, it's so uncanny.
エド。
Just the timing of like the eerie strings coming in right as it turns towards him and says his name. It
It's
just
so
really
good.
sells the scene.
Are those pinch harmonics? False harmonics?
I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah, it's harmonics for sure. I love this chord here.
I like both of those chords.
Yeah.
I think it has such a good setup into that chord.
人の命をもてあそぶようなことだ。人の命。そう人の命ね。
One thing I love about this composer's work, in FMAB in particular, is their usage of like harmonic rhythm, emphasizing the chords with these like either lush brass sections or string sections, and having these like pulses. And also dissension and ascension used like the range so good. Dude, the build in the music, like emphasizing the emotion in the scene is great.
Yeah. No, for sure. There's so much utilization of the way it ebbs and flows.
I love any of the tracks with the Warsaw Philharmonic Choir. Just like, they send me, bro. Oh, man.
The vocal parts in this are just so well written.
Oh my god, dude.
まさにそれですね。
Freaking good, man.
だが国
It's
家錬
not
金
fair.
術師
I am kind of
名
mad,
誉の人の命を
actually.
奪うことも辞さず行動せん今後も今回のような事件に出くわすことはある
I love that. That very, like, kind of bright chord
こともあるかもしれない
that, like, really elevates that progression at the end and brings it into this next section. Oh my god, that's gorgeous.
ましてや神でもない人間なんだ
I also like that you have the progression of it. Starts with a lot of highs and then leans more lows, and then it's more of the two kind of together.
Yeah. Dude, the instrumentation is
Also that,
so...
the fact that you can hear so much of like the end of the note is like a small thing that I really love. The reverberating S sound on the very end of the word.
It's just so good. I honestly like. I have a hard time talking about the like Trisha's Lullaby and Lapis Philosophorum, the Warsaw Philharmonic Choir pieces. It's like I I don't know why, but part of me is like, yo, I don't deserve to talk about this, bro. It's not
It's
right.
just too good. There's a lot to tackle with this particular scene. There's like a whole kind of arc to it because we have to set up the reveal, then the dramatic point of Ed kind of breaking down, and then his point of acceptance. It like goes through. It's kind of like speed running the stages of grief. And in that sense, there's a lot of the music is doing to aid with that process. So like I wanted to focus in. Maybe we can go sort of section by section on each part, since that might be an easier way to break things down. So like the first song that kicks in, I keep saying song, it's a bad habit. First piece.
You'll be able to do that soon. You'll be able to say song soon, and it'll be correct.
The first piece that kicks in is really, really eerie, as they're showing us this dog creature before they give us the reveal. Obviously, something's amiss. It's clear, and the music is telling us that from the beginning.
I think it's one of the most played pieces in the show. Yeah, I've watched FMAB a few times. I really like the show, but it is used a lot, which I think is great because they really build this language with the music. So the instant this comes on, you're like, oh fuck.
I would hesitate to take a guess that it's often used specifically in the context of like humanity's hubris, like pushing the bounds of morality for the sake of their own gain and progression, since that's a pretty common theme throughout the series. With this song, I keep saying it, man. I don't know what's on me today.
It's a hard pattern to break. You can blame my professor, my music history professor, for that, by the way.
With this piece, I really love how simple the melody is, yet how strikingly effective it is. Because the entirety of the melody is within like a 5-note section chromatically, like from the G sharp to C. That's the entire like main melody of the section. So it's not like jumping around or anything, and yet it's able to create so much impact with that very restricted section, especially in terms of how the instrumentation is selling it, because you have like the harmonics which give that wispiness. It's beautiful but chilling. There's that breathy slight sense of uncomfortableness that comes from it.
And the constriction, I think, like, you bring up a really good point of the smaller range of the actual melody itself. I think that aids in that feeling of kind of tight, constricted, unsettling, anxiety inducing. all of the above.
Yeah. Another thing that I really like about the way that it's written is how we have like a couple other beats, like we have the harp, which accentuates the first notes. It gives like body to the sound, which is great with the pairing with the harmonics, because with harmonics you lose a lot of the body of the note, so it's like doubling that. And then also we get that like repeated note in the Glock, which is, it's like almost like a church bell ringing or something like that, or a clock ticking. It gives that sense of, I guess, inevitability as it's constantly repeating. But
that's a cool way to put it. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, I get that feeling from how it,
like the daunting kind of the bell always chimes kind of.
There's no escape.
I hear you.
And especially, it's all sold in how good the performance of it all is. Not all of it is difficult, but it definitely takes a lot of skill to play it at that level. And with this level of awareness, there's a lot of very clear listening happening between the musicians when it comes to the music and how the textures develop and how the phrasing is. Like even listening to the Glock, which is just one repeated note. If you listen to that note in isolation, you can hear the rise and fall of the phrasing musically. Like that one note itself tells like a whole story.
Yeah, the triangle players are living right now. They are thrilled. They're like, one note? Let's go.
Yeah. Finally, my time has come.
Finally. Yeah, I think that's probably my favorite thing with regard to the orchestration is like how much depth everything is given, especially in the pieces that are very light on the instrumentation. I think it's fascinating how just like masterfully crafted like each instrument's place is and how they fill up the correct sonic space and like are have enough of a rhythmic arc to them that they're all interesting and really fill out the pieces. And one thing that we'll kind of notice a bit more in the next one is that with regard to you talking about the players and how they play, the music is written very playably. And this piece is deceptively difficult because false harmonics and pinch harmonics
are hard.
They're freaking hard.
They're hard. I can say that from experience.
We have had to change pieces on the fly, like not as important pieces. If there was a section with like false harmonics or something that was a little too quick, then we really needed to kind of move forward. False harmonics are hard. I'm not going to say it's like the hardest piece ever written, but it's written in a way that shouldn't be too difficult to play, I think. But strings are not my main instrument group, so sorry.
From the smallest arrangement to the largest, from the string quartet to the full orchestra, this composer really knows how to utilize every element to like its biggest like potential, biggest capability.
It's so good. It's so freaking good. There's a reason it's my favorite, bro. I love this score so much. Sorry.
There was one note I wanted to mention in terms of sound design before the next piece comes in, which is as Ed has this realization and the music cuts out, we get this rumbling sound in the background.
タッカーさん、国家資格取ったのいつだっけ?
It almost sounds like a slowed down like gust of wind or like an earthquake.
I thought it sounded like thunder.
Yeah, I could see thunder as well. It's like this,
especially because it's raining, isn't it?
That's a good point. I didn't make that connection.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take the wind out of your
I mean, there. I wouldn't have said it. So, but I felt like the timing of that and the way it's used is super cool because it's not only just on its own like a dramatic sound for the scene, but this moment is very literally shaking Ed's world right now. Yeah. Like he's shaking with rage. Like everything about it, that sound of everything rumbling and falling apart around him is super appropriate for the moment.
That's tight.
Or maybe they didn't think about it at all. They were like, "Oh, this probably sounds good enough." And if so, you've got great intuition. So after that is the scene where we have Ed beating the shit out of him, basically. And he's just completely in a rage, very angry. The piece is accompanying it perfectly. The big thing with this piece that I love is the way it builds tension in the harmony. The one thing I actually went out of my way to check because I was curious in terms of the chords. We have the one moment where there's like a stretched out like chord is built up, leading into an even more like stronger chord. That's terrible phrasing.
I kind of got what you were saying.
We have this chord build up, and then they go into another chord, and the chord is really, really powerful.
We have this one chord, and it's chord-like.
It's chord-like.
And then it has, and then there's this, and then a stronger chord.
But basically, according to what I checked, when I was
according
exactly on my piano, it sounds like it's like a C sharp diminished 7, but with
Uh-huh.
a 2, with the D on top as well. So
Okay.
you have that extra bit of dissonance from the C sharp and the D, which are half step apart, that going into a B flat augmented 7. So it's like two chords in a row that have that half step dissonance between the root
Mm.
and the top note of the chord. So it's like a cool way
Mm.
to keep building that tension even more so. And I mean, even going from a diminished to an augmented chord, you're getting that.
Yeah, that's pretty.
It's not letting you arrive home. Usually when you reach
Yeah.
a high point of dissonance, like a diminished chord, you want to resolve in some sort of way. And it's not giving you that at all, which is awesome.
Yeah. I think that another point I'd make, and oh no, here we go again. Back to the sound design, baby. There's two non-diegetic sounds. When Sho like says, look at your arm and look at Alphonse, whatever. And you're like, we're the same. There's two non-diegetic sounds. They're the same sound, but one plays when it goes to Ed's hand, and then the other plays when it goes to Alphonse.
Mhm.
And it's just like, it's mainly, I think, used for emphasis, really to drive the point home of like the similarities and kind of setting up some important plot points in the future, particularly with Alphonse. And I just thought it was interesting because when I first saw it, I was like, I didn't think about it. And the second time I was like, that's weird. Why did they do that?
Mhm.
And then I thought about it. I was like, oh, it's like, it's an impact thing. It's like meant to really drive these points home. So I thought it was interesting. It really wasn't obvious to me at first. And then like, I feel like you internalize it. And then when you think about it, you're like, that's weird. And then you think about it some more and it makes you like go full circle. It makes sense again.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was one of the things that stood out to me from that section.
I definitely feel that's a lot of sound design and music usage in general. It's something that's very unconscious. So when you start to think about it, you're like, what's going on there? And then you're like, oh, okay, I understand.
Like, that's fucking bizarre.
But obviously, if it works in the moment, then it's really doing its job, since that's 99% of the people's experience with it. I guess one cool part about this as well is the way that it alternates as the piece is building, because we have this like melodic passage, and then the lower register is droning, like just it's just like one note each time. It slowly is increasing in speed. It's slowly increasing in the speed that they alternate. So you have like at first it's like the melody plays for a bit, then you drone, melody plays for a bit, then it's like melody, drone, and then it reaches a point where the drone and the melody hit in sync with each other. So it's like a very effective way to build up that sense of climax as you're like reaching a bigger point.
It's just so good. The orchestra is just great. That's all. It's just great.
Oh, man, this particular scene is just great. This whole sequence I love, because the way it cuts off is also super good.
Yeah. No, both of the first ones come in and out at really perfect times.
The cutoff here specifically, the reason I like it so much is because it again has that narrative reasoning for it in the way that it's utilized, because obviously Ed is in this murderous range. He's angry as hell. He's like ready to kill this guy. Alphonse reaches out and stops him, and with the sound effect of that happening, the music also cuts out. So it's like literally as he's being pulled out of this rage, we're pulled away from the music that scores it, and by the same thing, by the audio equivalent of what is happening in the show. We hear the sound of him grabbing him, and in the show it's that act is what pulls him away from it. So it's like such a perfect way to accomplish something super simple.
Just shout out to Nina Tucker's voice. I didn't get like into a program and really mess around with trying to recreate it or anything, but the like roundness and smoothness of the voice sounds pitch shifted, particularly because of like vocal folds and like the weight of a person's voice, um, and the lack thereof, but it's also low. Um, Makes me think that it might be pitch shifted, and that is what gives it that kind of unsettling, uncanny, really just like disturbing sound quality to it. I think it's perfect. I think it's great. It's just enough.
Mhm.
Like, you don't want to go too far into the realm of absurdity, but you want to go just far enough that it's unsettling. You know, you want it to be disturbing and leave a mark. You don't want it to be absurd and ridiculous.
Right.
So
Yeah. I hadn't really thought of the uncanny valley for voices before. I guess for some people,
Yeah.
I've heard that they have that experience with like Vocaloid audio, but to me it's pretty distant from the natural sound of like a human voice because
Yeah.
it's completely, or because it's so synthetic.
I've had that with not Vocaloid, but other
Mhm.
other vocal synths like Western, a lot of Western vocal synths that are really trying to emulate voice. That can get pretty unsettling when they're used the wrong way.
I do think it's just interesting to note the way that you can use that for something like this, where you don't have to push it too far. Sometimes it's just pushing it a little bit out of what sounds correct and what sounds right makes it way
Yeah.
more uncanny than if you really tried to make it something super horrifying or weird sounding.
Yeah. Yeah. I think plenty of people take it too far, you know.
Mhm.
In that same situation. I think there are plenty of people who do way too many effects, but I think it's pretty well perfect that it's a very simple. To me, it sounds like it's pretty simple. Not too much has changed, but just enough.
Final piece we have in this incredible scene is, of course, Trisha's lullaby. That's what it is. It's not the main version of it, which is with full orchestra. This one
Mhm.
has a different. It's much more stripped back. It's just the vocals and then
It's
some sort of plucked
the
instrument.
Warsaw
I'm not
Philharmonic
sure,
Choir.
in the background.
Yeah, the Warsaw Philharmonic Choir. It sounds like it might be a mandolin. You could make an argument for like a table zither.
To be honest, I don't have as much when it comes to this one because it's really just how well written it is. The vocal harmony
Yeah.
is so pleasant. It's incredibly pleasing to the ears. The whole thing, it has that slight sense of joyfulness, but constantly maintains the overall more somber, sad tone to it. Just a little bit that there's almost this touch of hope to it. At the end of the day,
It's just
it's just a really well composed piece of music.
it's just perfect. It's just perfect. It's perfect. I like the instrumentation. I think that the pared down, like very stripped back instrumentation is perfect. Especially with how kind of pure the vocal sounds and how clean it is. The way that it sits on top of everything allows it to kind of ring. There's even parts where, have you ever heard of the tenor ring? So the tenor ring is basically this idea that tenors, when they sing in certain ranges and stuff, if I'm remembering correctly, they have this kind of like overtone thing, or the way that they sing has this overtone structure that goes and sits like on top and rings out over the orchestra. And I think that it's like there's a similar kind of vibe here where I think the vocals sit on top of this really pared down, simple, just strummed chord progression. And it allows the voices to kind of play and interact with each other and go back and forth and really just kind of move around through this really gorgeous harmonic structure. And the piece just evolves slowly. And it's, god damn it, it's perfect. Sheesh,
Yeah.
bro.
Like having the simpler background behind it, which gives that harmonic context for everything that we're hearing in the choir, but lets us really explore the relationship of what's going on there specifically,
Yeah.
without being too distracted by the more like lavish instrumentation that we could potentially have had there. Definitely, I think that It makes a big difference in the emotional effect in this particular scene.
It's just so good.
So yeah, we're gonna be jumping way far ahead into episode 52 with the scene of Hohenheim and Alphonse versus Pride.
ヒーローは遅れてやってくるものなんだよね。
ヒーローということは
I love this track.
I love that it ascends the whole time until like the very end where it just lingers on the unresolved tones. It's also that kind of like faster rhythm once it switches over to the violins. This track's so good too.
The use of the big bombastic brass is always impeccable.
It conveys like one of my favorite things about the soundtrack as a whole, which is how well the tracks build and their various like use cases due to like the really solid orchestration.
I also love we have that bit of like a B section.
Oh my god.
And then we go back to the original melody with different orchestration. I find that the way that it ends so fascinating.
I think this is probably the most animated I've been on a video just because it like makes me genuinely giddy. Like it's just so freaking, not that the other stuff we've talked about hasn't been incredible. It has, but like it just hits different for me. Okay, so the first track, it's used like a great deal throughout the show, which at this point I think you can definitely make an argument for the audience knowing what that track means in terms of like the musical language, because you're at episode 49. I'd hope you'd know, and it's used like a good amount. So like the vibe from the first note. And something interesting, which I kind of like touched on as we were watching, is that the piece like only rises and it keeps going up and up and up and up and up. And like once it reaches that peak, it lingers on these unresolved tones for a little bit, just long enough to be like unsettling, and then it resolves upwards. So the whole thing just goes like straight up and then and then back up. And this is like great because you know how people say rising tension? Well, there you go. I mean, it's not because of music, but literally it's rising tension. It's also synced to the scene and the action, which is always like adds a little bit of bite to the scene, which I like. And that's true of like most of, if not all of the cues that we've seen have had really, really impeccable music placement. And just like to keep that level of quality throughout is really freaking impressive.
Certainly it's one thing if you have like, you're working with synthesized instruments and you have the stems and everything where you can go in and literally edit the music itself. But here you're working with recordings of an orchestra. So you can obviously edit things in order to affect timing, but it's going to be a lot more difficult to do that when you're working with a finalized recording, I would imagine, compared to like
it's way more freaking difficult, by the way.
Just edit.
Just to throw that out there as someone with experience, it's a lot more difficult. Also, the way that the orchestration is really, really clean and really, really good, which we've brought up multiple times. But this time, I have a little bit of a different context for bringing it up, which is that basically like stuff is always happening and moving under things, right? So like, and there's plenty of room sound from the orchestra. It's a really, really, really amazing recording.
I do have to agree with you, especially on like just the quality of like the recording itself too, because you can. I feel like this would almost be distracting, except it's so like effortlessly like perfect that it works in how well you can hear the spacing of the entire orchestra. Like the directional sound of where all the instruments like are present in the orchestra is super clearly audible, and from this you can also hear the way all the sounds sort of blend as they're coming towards where you are in, I guess, like a more like theoretical sense. because you're not literally there, but in terms of where the audio
it's so freaking
like
pretty.
placement is set, it just sounds beautiful. There was also, I love how this is something that's in a lot of the music, but how good they are at
Dude, it's
using
so good.
repetition and melodies. Somehow finding a way to repeat this very small passage, and each time it feels a little bit different. Each time the context and like way that it's being repeated makes it feel like something completely new and fresh and exciting.
I brought this up, I think, a little bit earlier of like the composer is so good at repeating, but the orchestration is so solid that you can just like repeat and build forever. Like, and I'd be okay. You don't have to like have all of these sections or anything and have it go anywhere. I was about to say it's like Bolero, and then I'd get roasted. The orchestration is so good, and something to support that is that in the second piece, the underlying strings kind of pulse out the harmonic rhythm and give it plenty of forward motion, and it allows like the other lines to kind of dance around these strong beats. It allows you to do some really, really interesting stuff. As long as you have a strong rhythmic pulse and something pushing forward, you can have other stuff go off of that pulse and play around with the pulse in very interesting ways. This kind of gives context to the rest of the instruments, which just like allows, like, gives the track so much more emotional power. Then it like transitions into this like B section, this gorgeous like just string B section, and then it goes back, so it has this kind of ABA prime, I guess ABA prime section.
Yeah,
but I think the other one / last thing was something I said I would talk about later, and I'm going to talk about it now, which is the string runs in the second section. So in the second, like the A prime section, you'll notice that they'll double certain notes, and this works in twofold. One is adding emphasis to certain beats, and two is making it easier to play. Ease of play is super important for any recording session because you're usually on a tight schedule, and every extra take takes money and my sanity.
Writing for orchestra is something that I find endlessly impressive among people who are able to do it really well, because there's a difference between being able to write for orchestra and just being able to write for every instrument, which is also impressive on its own. Knowing how to write and understanding some of the nuances of what makes something easier to play or more effective, or just generally will sound better when played by these musicians, knowing that for all the instruments individually is a challenge in and of itself. But then understanding the way all of those sounds are going to come together and unify when you're utilizing them as part of one whole is like a talent on top of that.
Stop.
So it's when you are able to reach like this level of ability, then it's like super duper.
I was about to play
impressive.
like, oh, Kor, you shouldn't have. But then you said this level, and I was like, well, okay, shit.
I mean, writing for orchestra is hard enough as is, but especially in terms of
this is
how gorgeously everything
this is way beyond
is
my level,
unified
I'm being honest.
is incredible.
I don't know if I realized how incredible the sound design was for the show overall. The music placement is impeccable. The actual like sound direction and Foley is really, really fascinating. And like the choices are obviously very deliberate. And then the music itself, I knew the music was gorgeous. I love the music. But like the other 2 points were stuff that I hadn't really looked at all that much. And like revisiting these scenes was pretty eye-opening. Like the quality is insane.
I definitely agree. The sound design was the most surprising thing revisiting this with that open ear. Like every single choice feels like very clearly motivated and well thought out, and just super effective at getting its job done.
It owns.
Well, I think that about does it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching.
Don't forget to FMA smash that like button.
Obviously, let us know down below in the comments what you thought. We love reading them.
We hope you enjoyed it. It was a blast to make.
Awesome.
Bye.
See you in the next one.